It's so exciting for me to be here at this celebration because I get to hear Nick schoolers who have come before me expressing something that I've felt from my very first days at Environment Hall. It's a sense of belonging, homecoming, that sentiment of, yes, these are my people. And I'm thrilled to be a part of this family that we've created. But it's no secret that the environmental field has struggled to create a community that's representative of our country's true diversity. And we often struggle to effectively convey the value of our work to people who are not like us. As environmentalists, we share certain values and ideals. We share similar life experiences that ignited our passion for the natural world. And we all know the same stories from Thoreau, Leopold, and Muir. But if we want to engage with diverse communities, we need to start telling a different story. Because diversity and inclusion is not about giving our experience to others. It's about respecting the values and experiences that are different from our own. I'm going to share some specific examples of how we can start to engage in more inclusive conversations about the environment. Over the summer, I held a stand-back internship position with the North Carolina League of Conservation Voters, where I researched best practices for incorporating equity, diversity, and inclusion into environmental communications. The key takeaway is that environmental messages can be framed with a variety of different values. We tend to communicate utilizing the values that appeal to us, things like stewardship or spiritual connection, or the inherent value of wilderness. But with some critical thinking, we can begin to frame our messages with a different set of values and thus connect with different audiences. For example, if you want to talk about renewable energy, then first of all, let's call it clean energy. Renewable and sustainable speak to the future, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But clean energy is something people can relate to in their everyday lives. Clean energy can have a positive impact in the present. It's true that renewable energy will cut down on greenhouse gas emissions, the most significant driver of climate change. But how about this? Clean energy will cut down on air pollution that threatens the health of our families. Public health is a tremendously effective frame for helping people to engage with the environment from a different perspective. And this particular message also touches on the value of protecting your family. Family is a hugely important value, and so is the ability to provide for your family through stable, well-paying employment. For someone who may be struggling to provide for their family's basic needs, we can't expect environmental values to come first. That's why the Labor Network for Sustainability was created, to help coordinate the efforts of labor organizations and environmental groups. After all, clean energy industries create job opportunities in construction, manufacturing, and technology. For one more example of unique framing on this issue, I turned to Conservatives for Clean Energy, an organization dedicated to leading the conversation about the economic benefits of renewable energy. Their website boasts that choice and competition in North Carolina's energy market is good for consumers. So we have public health, jobs, economic growth. None of these frames is any more or less correct than another. But in concert, these various ideals and values communicate a much richer story that resonates with more people. People also respond strongly to people. We're drawn to stories about community, about voices coming together, about individuals joining forces to accomplish something greater than what they could achieve on their own. So it's true that coal ash is contaminating our water supply and its toxins are accumulating up the food chain. But we can reframe even this message to highlight the value of human connection in overcoming these environmental challenges. Our neighbors in Appalachia are fighting against the injustice of coal ash pollution in their communities, and they need your support. Justice, solidarity with your neighbors. These are powerful values that appeal to group identity, values that resonate most strongly with those groups that have historically been marginalized. Environmental justice is one of the most powerful frames we can use to connect with diverse audiences, because we know for a fact that low-income communities of color are disproportionately impacted by negative environmental changes. This means that we need to openly and actively engage in conversations about people of color and the environment. The conversation is already happening around us among groups like Outdoor Afro, Green Latinos, and the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, organizations that were created by and for people of color who care about the environment. So these organizations already share many of our own values, and yet we can learn something more by listening to their stories. Earlier this year, the founder and CEO of Outdoor Afro, Rumap, published an op-ed along with Alaskan native Princess Dajri Johnson of the Gitchin Nation to speak out for the protection of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Their powerful statement begins, "What does a woman who grew up in Oakland, California, at the heart of an urban center, have in common with a woman with roots in the remote outskirts of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska? More than you think." And they continued by saying, "We are two determined women of color, united by our belief that human rights and social justice are inextricably linked to saving our shared planet." If someone had asked you to write about protecting the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, is this the frame you would have chosen? I confess that when I joined the Nick School community last year, I knew almost nothing about environmental justice. It wasn't something that I had heard about from the other environmentalists in my life. But during my first year in the MEM program, I encountered multiple stories about Native American communities across the United States who are fighting for the protection of their land and their cultural heritage. I heard guest lectures from environmental justice advocates like Drs. Dorsita Taylor and Sylvia Hood Washington. And I saw our very own Master of Forestry students reveal the historical redlining that has created unequal access to green space right in our hometown of Durham. I discovered that there are students and staff members and faculty at the Nicholas School who are passionate about discussing the need for equity as it relates to the environment. I was so glad to have the opportunity to pursue this research during my internship this summer with the North Carolina League of Conservation Voters, where I know that the results of my work will have an impact on their future approach to communications and outreach. We have the potential to be leaders in making the environmental field a more inclusive community. But we need to practice framing our messages with a different set of values. And we need to continue to talk about the unequal social impacts of environmental changes. And we need to lift up the voices of those who are working to change that narrative. Because if we're serious about bringing diversity to our field, then we need to diversify our stories. Thank you.